At the turn of the 1960s, on both sides of the Atlantic, a new wind of inspiration was blowing over the world of art. Young people were questioning the era they were living in, rebelling against the powers in place, media, and consumerism. The US saw the birth of pop art with Andy Warhol. During the same time, France saw the rise of the nouveau réaliste, or new realism movement, led by two young men from Nice, Yves Klein and Arman.
Seeing that you're a rebellious person must mean that...
I'm not a revolutionary, but I am rebellious.
Rebellious, curious, and full of energy, Arman would appropriate objects, break them, burn them, and put them back together, guided by his fascination for mass consumerism.
This whole cycle of production, consumerism, and destruction. We use things and then we dispose of them.
With his dandy look and big dark eyes, Yves Klein was painting the world blue. A blue so intense that it provoked a new sensorial experience for the viewer.
First there is nothing, then there is a deeper nothing, then comes a blue deepness.
With Yves Klein and Arman, art became a spectacle. In the aftermath of the war, audiences were in search of novelty and provocation.
They revolutionized the world of art, and we can still feel that to this day. They introduced the notion of performance in painting. The viewers were invited to see how the work was created, but they were also invited to take part in its creation.
Klein and Arman didn't feel like they were part of the two main artistic movements of the time, figurative and abstract, which they found boring. They had the ambition of pushing the limits of art further, rethinking the role of the artist.
To become an important artist, you have to come up with something different from your predecessors. They didn't want to be part of any tradition, they wanted to overturn them or simply ignore them. They were in that frame of mind because this was the era of modern art.
Obviously, people's jaws dropped. They suddenly realized something was happening in the world of art. Many artists followed in Klein's footsteps.
And for the young Yves Klein, challenging traditions was also a way of emancipating himself from his parents.
His father, Fred Klein, was a figurative painter. Mary Raymond, his mother, was an abstract painter. She was well known and was more successful than her husband.
They were part of the abstract art scene of the time, with people like Nicolas de Staël. Yves Klein grew up in this artistic environment.
Painting fascinated him. He found it very interesting, but it wasn't what he wanted to do. He didn't want to follow in his parents' footsteps, which is a rather ordinary reaction for a child, especially for an ambitious one.
Klein was determined to pursue a career in judo. At the age of 24, he went to Japan to become a black belt. He dreamt of recognition, and his perseverance ended up paying. He became the first European to reach the level of fourth dan. But back in France, his diploma is not recognized. Demoralized, Yves gives up judo. Instead of becoming a renowned athlete, he will become a great artist. Going against the style of his parents, Yves found his answers in color, more precisely, just one color. Monochrome paintings became his material, his subject, and his signature style.
I had started making monochrome paintings alongside my pictorial work that came from my parents' influence, as they are both painters, because I felt like colors were winking at me constantly as I was working.
Convinced that monochrome paintings were the only way to go, Klein attended the Salon des Réalités Nouvelles, the main event in Parisian abstract art, in 1955, where he presented an orange monochrome painting. This was the first time he confronted his work to his peers.
The Salon's director was an artist and was friends with Marie Raymond. He called her up and said, "Tell your son to stop bothering us. He has brought what he calls his work, an orange monochrome painting. It's just orange, nothing else, and he's calling it his work. He's treating us like idiots. There's no way I'm letting him get away with this."
The painting was simply rejected. He started out with being rejected. For an ambitious artist at the time, the era of modernism, being rejected was a badge of honor. It's reminiscent of Manet at the Salon des Refusés, etc. So he started out with rejection and a dose of scandal.
Arman was also making the news. He was collecting rubbish, placing it in a plexiglass box, and presenting it as his work. He was selling these for 500,000 francs in galleries, calling them poubelles, rubbish bins in English. No one had ever seen the likes of it. And the most surprising thing was that Arman was known for a much more classical style just a few months prior.
I started out as a good painter in the classical sense, the way painting is taught in fine art schools. But I've come to believe that our traditional means have become sclerotic.
But without a gentle push from his friend, Arman might have remained an abstract painter following the path of artists such as Nicolas de Staël or Jackson Pollock.
Yves Klein, upon returning from Japan in 1954, saw one of his paintings and told him it was interesting but actually quite banal. He said there were too many others like it, especially on the Parisian art scene. Yves Klein encouraged Arman to develop and explore a more personal approach.
All of this allowed him to discover an object that had been under his nose the whole time in his father's shop, ink stamps. You can very well imagine him being bored in his father's shop, picking up an ink stamp and obliterating a sheet of paper until it is completely saturated.
Why don't you do what you do, what you do, what you do, why don't you do what you do, what you do, what you do?
Arman had been working at his father's furniture shop in Nice for many years. Klein would often come to visit. They would spend time fasting and meditating with another friend of theirs, Claude Pascal, in the basement of the shop that they repainted blue. Sometimes they stared at the moon for hours on end. "We were mad as hatters," reported Arman in later years. The three men met on a judo mat when they were 19. Their common yearning for spirituality is what brought them closer to each other. One day, during the summer of 1947, the three men concluded a strange pact while sitting on the beach. They're going to share the universe between the three of them.
Yves Klein decided he would have the sky's blue color. Claude Pascal, who was a poet, would own the air, and Arman would have earth and its riches, which makes perfect sense when you know the work he produced afterwards. It was the first inkling of the idea that characterized their careers. It shows their ambition and their nonchalant attitude.
When they were not out dancing with girls, Arman and Klein organized cockroach races. They were charismatic, playful, curious, and in search of enriching and stimulating relationships. Arman was only 22 when he met Eliane Radig, a music composer. The two got married a year later.
During the 50s, Yves Klein and Arman yearned for personal growth, notably in the context of being part of a stimulating couple. Eliane Radig introduced Arman to avant-garde music. he introduced her to avant-garde visual arts. They would discuss cinema, literature, philosophy, etc. They transformed their apartment into a meeting place for artists, intellectuals, and writers. This was the grassroots of what later became known as l'École de Nice.
Eliane was a music composer, so her field of work meant that she fitted in well with the group and had a legitimate role.
The couple settled in Nice in a neighborhood called Parc de la Californie. They had 3 children and employed an army of au pair girls. Amongst them were a young Italian girl, Elena Palumbo, and her German friend, Rotraud Ucker.
It was like paradise for me. Armand was charming, and so were Eliane and the children. Their welcome was extraordinary. I felt very comfortable, very much at home.
We straight away developed affinities, and I felt really comfortable at their place. All of the family friends would drop by. We were all friends. And Yves was among those family friends.
The first time I met Yves, he walked in and sat down opposite me, just like we are now, with a big smile. He blew me away. He was very convincing. He was openly flirting with me, and it seemed as though he liked me.
Rotraud and Yves quickly fell madly in love. During the summer of 1957, he often joined her at the Armands' apartment. Children would be running through the living room, which also doubled as the parents' bedroom and socializing area. People would come all the way from Paris to debate on subjects related to art and society. In this joyful atmosphere, Yves felt very much at home.
Yves lived in Paris and had become very Parisian in his ways, whereas Armand remained very Mediterranean. Yves would drive his car down to Nice and arrive directly at Armand's place, where they would pick up their conversation just where they had left off.
Klein didn't miss out on any of his friends' artistic effervescences. Already in 1954, he participated in Armand's project titled Allure d'objet. The idea behind it was simple. Armand chose an object. It would be a vase or a necklace. He would dip the object in paint and throw it onto the canvas to create a print of the object.
The object becomes the paintbrush. You dip it in the ink and it creates a trace, a mark.
While Armand focused on objects, Klein continued his exploration of color. Through his work, he reconnects with the spirituality he so appreciated in judo. He was convinced his approach would make him a different kind of painter. In 1955, his first personal exhibition opened in Paris. For the first time, viewers from the public were confronted to several of his monochrome works, painted with a roller so that no personal artistic touch could be detected.
When Yves Klein presented his first series of monochrome paintings, they were all different colors. He was taken aback by people's reaction that saw his work as a decorative, colorful installation, an ensemble of paintings, as if the paintings were depending on each other to create a broader polychrome piece of work.
This triggered something very important inside Yves Klein. He said to himself, I must choose one color. I must be the one who paints that color. And he chooses blue.
The color blue doesn't have dimensions. It goes beyond dimensions, unlike all the other colors. All colors can be associated to tangible, concrete ideas from a psychological perspective, whereas blue reminds us of the sea and the sky, the two most abstract elements of the tangible and visible world.
It's a spiritual color. We could mention Giotto's Madonna or the blue sky. In any case, it's a color that meant so much to him that it becomes a spiritual outlet.
But the use of this deep-sea blue comes with some technical issues.
I spent a long time searching for the right fixative component so that the pigments in the paint, which are so dazzlingly bright when they are in powder form at the paint shop, remain that way. It's appalling to see how they lose their essential brightness when mixed with oil, for instance. It is as if the pigment had been mummified.
He came up with a technical process that allowed him to use the pigment without altering it and to keep its original brightness. This is what we now refer to as International Klein Blue.
The Parisian cultural scene and its actors were curious of young Yves' work, which they considered as slightly mad experiments. A young but renowned critic of the time, Pierre Estany, had been following him since his first exhibition. His support played a major role in the developing careers of both Klein and Arman.
Pierre Estany provided them with a theoretical background, a kind of theoretical guarantee, which they needed for their work to be recognized and find its place on the Parisian art scene.
Pierre Estany came up with the formula monochrome proposition to avoid using the word painting and state that this work was different in essence to previous paintings.
Estany had contacts all over Europe. He organized an exhibition in Milan for his young protégé titled L'Epoca Blu, where Yves exposed his IKB monochromes for the first time, which marked a turning point in his career. He was 28 at the time.
The exhibition at the Apollinaire Gallery was a crucial moment in his career. He presented 11 monochrome paintings of identical format. The sides were painted as well to favor the viewer's immersion into the painting. Each one of them was charged with a unique, intangible sensitivity.
As similar in appearance as these blue monochrome propositions are, people clearly experience each one differently from one another. The viewer moves from one painting to another and is instantly plunged into a state of contemplation in a world of blue. This fact allows us to demonstrate that the pictorial quality of each painting can be expressed by other means than simply through physical and material appearances.
More than just a material surface, his paintings suggest a presence, an emotion experienced in a unique way by each viewer. Klein searched for all possible means to make the experience more immersive for the viewer. To reinforce the idea of being soaked in the color blue, he had the idea of using sponges gorged with blue paint and included them in his work.
It's an object from the workshop that can become a work of art. It's also a living material.
As Klein was drifting deeper into his immaterial endeavors, Arman's work focused on our relationship to the material world. He accumulates objects and develops a new creative process that was to become his trademark.
I had drawers full of corks and radio valves. One day in 1959, I decided to consider a drawer full of valves to be a work of art. So I placed a plastic cover on it, painted the sides black, and showed it as it was. This was my first accumulation.
The principle behind the accumulation process is to present a reproduction of an identical object or of several similar objects. Armand picks up an object or a family of objects that he gathers inside a given space, like a box, for example.
Objects surround us whether we like it or not, and they are no longer handmade like they used to be. We are far from using primitive objects. They pop out of machines like eggs being laid. Things like plastic bowls, for example. We are surrounded by a proliferation of objects, which can be a source of anxiety, but can also be fascinating and interesting.
Restany presented these first accumulation as youthful, dynamic works of art. If you look closely, they were more like a kind of homage to a world that was in the process of disappearing. He had used old suitcases that remind us of the war, when people were locked up in concentration camps, where there would be mountains of suitcases, mountains of dentures, mountains of shoes. I find it important that Armand chose to show this. It's a lot deeper than what one might think.
Obviously, there is a historical and social quality to my work when I choose to use 100 gas masks from the First World War or from the Second.
So what do you think should be the role of an artist in society?
We used to think the role of the artist was to show things. Nowadays, I think the role of the artist is to give food for thought.
Armand invites viewers to question the world surrounding them. Klein invites them to soak in the color. Although their projects and processes were radically different, their end results can nonetheless be compared.
Both Klein's monochromes and Armand's accumulations are linked by the same idea of total invasion.
If we drop 4 spoons on the table, our eye sees 4 objects. If we drop 16 of them, we can see the spoons, but we can no longer count them. This is what I call a threshold. If you drop 200 spoons, it becomes an abstract monochrome metallic composition. Our eye only sees one shiny, repetitive element.
At what point does an object become unrecognizable? When does it begin to lose its identity, creating this effect on us where our eye loses itself in the accumulation? This question brings us to what Yves and Armand were fascinated by. Their respective work was on parallel tracks at that point in time.
Armand and Yves spoke to each other a lot. They would exchange a lot of ideas, give each other advice, helping each other develop new ideas.
Think of the image of two people playing table tennis. The ball is sent over the table and goes back and forth. Occasionally, the ball falls to the ground, and someone picks it up and puts it in their pocket. I think this intensity in their friendship and in their exchange of ideas was the basis for the extraordinary relationship they had.
Generally speaking, I think they emulated each other because they had a form of mutual respect for each other as artists and as men. This was the case from the very start, and it remained this way despite a few disagreements between the two men over the years.
The two artists were accomplices in their will to break the codes of art. On this front, Klein gave the first blow by pushing the limits of his spiritual blue experience even further.
He thought, I need to push the limits. He was always a step ahead of everyone else. His next move would be invisibility.
What he presented to the public at his exhibition in 1958 was to become a milestone in art history.
I think Yves Klein's most famous exhibition was the empty one at the Iris Claire Gallery in 1958. The opening took place on the 28th of April, Yves' 30th birthday. That has a lot of symbolic significance. And the exhibition was a real milestone, simply because there was nothing to be seen in the gallery. It made for a curious experience.
I lock myself up in the gallery 24 hours before the opening to repaint it completely white. Firstly, to wash off any traces of the numerous past exhibitions. Secondly, because by painting the space white with an absence of color, I'm momentarily turning this gallery into my workspace, turning it into my studio.
Instead of creating a painting, he paints the entire room white. He paints the ceiling, the floor, the walls, and spends time living in the space. Why? Because he wants the space to be imprinted by his sensitivity. Because, and this is something I believe, when you spend time somewhere and you are truly alive, you necessarily leave an imprint.
The window outside the Iris Claire Gallery was painted blue. People had to pass through a blue curtain to enter the courtyard and access the gallery. In a way, they had to go through the color blue. In the courtyard, viewers were given a blue cocktail, so they had swallowed blue. Blue was inside them before they entered the space. There was a form of articulated contrasting between the blue, which still had a material quality to it, and the splendid, indefinable emptiness saturating the indoor space.
Some people reacted passionately. Others thought it was nonsense. It was a bit of both. But some people who experienced this space felt truly fulfilled by this emptiness.
Armand's response came 2 years later at the same gallery, with the same irreverence and unconventional ways. He filled the Iris Claire Gallery from the floor to the ceiling with 36 square meters of rubbish and objects he had bought from the Goodwill stores and markets. His exhibition of fullness opened in October 1960. Klein gave him the idea of using cans of sardines filled with rubbish as invitations, thus providing the viewers with a simple taste of what to expect at the gallery.
In a certain way, it was a direct response to Klein's previous exhibition. But despite what we could think, it wasn't fullness as a response to emptiness, but rather fullness in response to another type of fullness. It was Armand's material fullness in response to Klein's immaterial fullness.
This exhibition was the high point of Armand's work on rubbish, feeding the thought process in regards to modern society. By accumulating domestic rubbish in his plexiglass boxes, Armand did the equivalent of photographing the consumerist habits of his time.
When he was working on trash cans, for instance, he started out doing so in France, and then he did the same thing in the US. At first, there were so many differences in the content of the trash, and then less and less differences as France became more Americanized in its consumerism habits. For instance, yogurt pots in France were made out of glass. That certainly did not exist in the US. With time, the French switched to plastic, aligning with the Americans. It was an opportunity to see the differences in the effects of consumerism in France and in America. In the end, he's like an archaeologist. In the future, people will study this trash and see how we lived as a species.
Armand's exhibition didn't last for 3 weeks as initially planned. It was cut short because of a bad odor. A smell of rotten seafood was wafting down the Rue des Beaux-Arts, and Armand was beginning to build a reputation.
The exhibition shed some light on Armand's artistic process. It was the opportunity for him to present his accumulations and work on rubbish for the first time in France. He started becoming notorious, but you can't say he was getting much recognition. His exhibition was very criticized and broadly misunderstood.
Armand's exhibition created an unprecedented scandal in Nice that spread like a wildfire. My 2 siblings and I were all at the same school in Nice, and simultaneously, in each of our respective classrooms, just after the newspapers came out, our teachers announced that a madman had filled a gallery in Nice with nothing but rubbish. All 3 of us had the same slightly staggering experience of hearing our father being called mad. We decided there and then of how to respond to being told that we were the children of a madman. We would define ourselves as Nouvelle Vague.
After resounding success, the careers of both artists are gaining momentum. In 1960, Pierre Estany instigated the creation of the Nouveau Réaliste movement, the French counterparts of American pop art. Along with César, Niki de Saint-Phal, Jean Tinguely, or Villeglé, Armand and Klein are multiplying opportunities to have their work be better known. Having well understood the growing importance of media, they invite journalists and photographers to attend every one of their gallery openings.
That's one of the characteristics of the movement that was clearly expressed by Klein and Arman, and their link to the Iris Clerch Gallery. They included the media, the press, by inviting them to their events.
They had the will to be seen and probably the will to nourish their work with an exterior energy and by the point of views of outsiders. But these public events also gave them the opportunity to make their new ideas, techniques or concepts official in a way. It was a way of patenting a concept through the coverage offered by the media.
Yves Klein reached the peak of his career with an audacious and spectacular idea, that of using women's body to paint with. And as usual, Restany comes up with a catchy title for his new creation. They will be called Anthropometry.
It all started after the Emptiness exhibition that was all about immaterial pictorial sensitivity. Klein feels the need to reincarnate something. You can't live in something immaterial.
He asks two women to cover their bodies in paint and leave an imprint of their bodies on a sheet of paper.
This is when he used the term of living paintbrush. Instead of painting with rollers, he paints with the bodies of his models. He directed them from a distance by telling them to go right or to go left.
Right. So spread the paint in a circular motion onto your belly and on your thigh also. On your breasts as well. On your belly, that's good. On your thigh, that's good. Let's go. Place yourself directly against the surface. You must completely embrace the surface. Exactly, that's very good. Press hard and remain constantly in contact. Okay, slowly turn and remain in contact. Every shape must be embracing the surface. Great, very well done.
Whilst Arman was focusing on collecting the morphological imprints of objects, in a more graphic sense, more formal and didactical, Yves Klein with his Anthropometry series was more interested in collecting a body's energetic imprint. They weren't following the same logic at all.
So you know how this was made?
He covered the bodies in paint. It's a kind of print, right?
He's a total imposter.
I find it modern. I think it's fantastic. It's luminous. That's it. It's beautiful.
He felt that the public had some questions. So he organized a public event with musicians playing the Monotone Silence Symphony.
It consisted of 20 minutes of a single note, followed by 20 minutes of silence.
Only a few privileged people attended the performance. For the time being, Klein and Arman's fame was limited to a close circle of avant-garde art enthusiasts. Both artists were still unable to earn a living from their work. Klein gave judo lessons to pay for his supplies and ate meals on credit at La Coupole. Arman continued selling furniture to feed his big family.
They were penniless. At Christmas, they would gather small denomination coins, like we do nowadays for charities, to buy supplies to make presents for the children. She would sew, and he would make toys like cots for dolls, for example. The early days were tough times for him, as people around him expected him to get a more conventional job in order to provide for his family. And Eliane would spend the night telling him, no, if you do something else, you won't continue what you've started.
For both Arman and Klein, art always came first. The lack of money didn't get in the way of their ideas or of their artistic conviction. Any material became a pretext to create art, may it be air, resin, water, or fire.
They both used fire as a paintbrush, but in two radically different ways. But in both cases, what remains is the result of an artistic deed.
Résultat d'une action de l'artiste.
Yves Klein worked with the National French Gas Company to mark a sheet of paper with fire.
Yves enjoys combining his concepts and gets the idea of using his living paintbrushes in combination with his fire paintings.
First, we were hosed down with cold water in the workspace at the gas company. It was quite cold. Once our bodies were drenched, we would press our bodies against the cardboard and let it soak up the water from our bodies. Then we would sit and wait, shivering in the cold, as Yves would burn the paper. The paper burned at different temperatures, depending on how wet it was. Nuances of brown and gold began to appear. And then we would cover ourselves in blue paint, press up against the cardboard, and make a blue imprint. Then Yves would outline our bodies with a paint gun. And then we would go and wash off the paints. Although the employees of the gas company were delighted, but they didn't even applaud us. They could have. We were so cold.
Yves Klein used fire from an energetic point of view, reminding people that fire contained the three colors of his chromatic vocabulary: gold, pink, and blue.
Although Yves Klein is known worldwide for his international Klein blue, he also regularly uses two other colors throughout his career, a deep pink and a gold, both associated with religion. Yves was a fervent Catholic and was interested in religious iconography.
I've often noticed his interest for these three colors that represent divinity, and that you often find in Japanese paintings. He injected this Oriental sensitivity into his work.
On his end, Armand was working on a way more monumental project, more virile and more explosive as well.
Armand had control over the combustion. The goal was never to turn the object into ashes. It just needed to leave a trace. The object needed to remain recognizable as soon as you laid eyes on it. It was just about creating a thin film over the objects, not about destroying them completely. It wasn't a process of destruction.
Burnt destruction is both original and more catastrophic. Had I kept burning it and let it turn to dust, that would have been real destruction. It's like cooking. You have to pull out the roast before it's overcooked.
They both developed a thought process on how an artistic gesture should be minimal and contained. Armand's gestures were carefully studied and cultivated to be as on point as possible, but Klein was more about erasing the gesture itself to create the most immaterial art possible.
In 1962, Klein began working on one of his more atypical projects. He decided to create a sculptural portrait of his friend Armand. Armand accepted, but didn't keep a good memory of this experience. With his torso set in plaster, he had difficulties breathing.
Klein wanted to immortalize all of the nouveaux réalistes by making their portraits as a kind of echo to the paintings of the Renaissance. These busts are made of bronze, covered in pure pigments and placed against a gold background, as if they were sacred characters. Yves Klein was only able to make the busts of Martial Reis, Armand and Claude Pascal.
His project is brutally interrupted. On the 6th of June 1962, Yves Klein died of a heart attack at home in his Parisian apartment. The world of art was speechless. Yves Klein was only 34.
The death. Speaking about the death of a young man is a difficult thing. He was a young man. He died of a heart attack or of some heart-related defect. He'd already suffered 2 heart attacks in the weeks preceding his death.
He had been told he needed to rest, absolutely. Rotraut was pregnant and he was very busy with his commissions.
He was a very tense person, living with a lot of stress. He had a second heart attack after getting in an argument at the Museum of Decorative Arts. It was during a group exhibition. They organized a debate. It got heated and he had another heart attack. A second heart attack. The third was fatal.
It felt like I was levitating. It felt like the bed was levitating as well. He was there and at the same time he wasn't. I felt like he was still holding me, but he was dead.
Rotraut called me on the phone, and I came straight away. But like everyone else, I felt completely helpless. When someone dies that young, you feel completely helpless, completely incapable of reacting.
Armand was deeply moved by his friend's death, his childhood friend. He made a point of honor to prepare the body and dressing it in its Chevalier de Saint-Sébastien outfit for the ceremony at the church where Rotraut and him had gotten married just a few months earlier.
By dying so young at an age, when he was entering his prime, Yves Klein has become a legend in the world of art.
When you see what he accomplished, the number of things, ideas, and different projects he produced, it's hard to believe he did it all in only 8 years. In fact, he completely burnt himself out through his work, and it killed him.
Armand went on to have a successful international career and lived in Nice and New York. He died at the age of 77, still animated by the deep friendship that changed his life. In 15 years of working side by side, 15 years of artistic effervescence and passionate audacity, these 2 men managed to leave a deep mark on the world of contemporary art.
I think it was a truly revolutionary time. What happened then marked the end of an era in terms of sensitivity and the beginning of a new one, And obviously, Yves was one of the pillars of this historical phenomenon.
He gave the people the possibility to do things they hadn't thought of. He made them free. Yves truly did everything in his power to keep inventing new things over and over again. It was a non-stop process.
Arman opened many doors for future artists. He was a pioneer in many ways. And you can see that in the works of Damien Hirst, Jeff Koons, Gupta, etc. It all comes from him. I'm grateful that we are all influenced by someone. Arman was influenced by Van Gogh, by Schwitters, by Jackson Pollock. But he did his own thing. He created his own dialogue.
Do you think you have reached a certain level of conformity?
We all reach conformity. Luckily, other anti-conformists will come after us. But I don't know this for sure. Let's ask the ball if we will reach a certain level.
What is it?
It's an object I bought in the US. It's a ball that gives answers. You turn it over, and an answer appears in this little window. Let's see, it says very doubtful. So if we rely on the ball's answer, we will not be reaching conformity.